Yeah, and so Beverly was up there today.
We saw Beverly up there today.
Yep.
Beverly, do you have any comments on MacKenzie? It's probably preliminary. She just probably did a pretty basic survey, but can you tell us anything?
Well, you know, I will say that a lot of the mortality actually looks like it's so let me just back up a little bit. When bark beetles kill a tree, it usually takes about a good full year for the trees to turn red. Now, western pine beetle has numerous flights during the summer, meaning like there's peak periods where adult beetles will move from one tree, you know, and then a new generation emerges and they go to attack another tree. So a lot of the trees that might just be turning red right now were actually attacked last year. And those generations are developing in those red trees to move to green trees. And so if you're seeing a lot of trees that still have a slight yellow-green, I mean, they're most likely the ones that still have bark beetles on the inside of them. And what I noticed is that, yes, a lot of those trees were actually killed. It looks like just by 2000, and they were killed in 2013, turned color in 2014, and then it's doubled. What it looks like was killed last year in 2014. That's now turning red for 2015. So it sadly is a lot of new mortality that we're seeing.
And I'll refer this question to Chief Skaggs as we move on, but what is this? Does the Forest Service have any broad-term plans in terms of treating fuels and managing the conditions in the forest right now, especially in this area?
Those are good questions. Turn this on. It's on? Okay. I'm loud? Yeah. I've been thinking, what can I tell you that you need to know? Better? Okay. Sorry. Been sitting too long. Brain went to sleep. No. Been thinking, what can I tell you that you need to hear? You know, we have projects ongoing. Teresa mentioned a few, but they're small compared to the problem that I'm seeing. You know, we took a trip today, and you know, I got to see what some of it looked like back in November when we were burning on MacKenzie Ridge, or on Pine Ridge burn. And, you know, you're right. You know, it's like a doubling. And so the drought didn't end, and so I'm taking 2015, 16. It's going to double again potentially. So I'm thinking it's probably going to get worse before it gets better. So what can we do? All right, I'm thinking about your communities. I'm thinking you have an opportunity to treat the fuels around your landscape, and it sounds like you've got some partners to do that. That's good. Well, the Forest Service. Okay, I heard access roads. You know, from a fire standpoint, the best thing we can do is try to get firefighters to the incident when things are burning. And so if we can brush those roads, you know, drop some of the small trees, maybe leave some of the big trees for the loggers to take care of so we don't make a mess, we can do that. And at our, you know, we have quite a few firefighters across the nation that come here every year to fight fire. And each year, I don't know if you've seen crews on standby, they're doing work brushing roads. And I've got agreement with Teresa that we're going to do that again. And probably where we need to focus is around the communities, around your homes where you got Forest Service land and a road that needs to be brushed. That's a good place to start from what I can see. And maybe thin out some of those smaller trees that have died, pile them. We got, let's see, I've got 5 chippers in Porterville that's at our warehouse, and each district at least has 1 chipper. And I think with CAL FIRE working with our crews, maybe we can do something together to make a dent, because there's a lot of work out there. I mean, I could talk about we're going to treat 2,000 acres. I think that's a small amount of what I saw out there. That's a drop in the bucket. We've got thousands of acres, and if this is just the beginning, it's going to double again. I think we got to be thinking this is going to be a bigger problem than what we currently see. And so I always like to plan for the worst and hope for the best. So that's where I'm at. I'm looking at working with CAL FIRE and all of our other partners, see what we can bring to bear to actually do something in the communities that's going to make a difference if wildfire does strike. And we just talked today. Okay, what if we do get a wildfire? What kind of resources are you going to respond with? Well, we do have a set based upon like low fire danger, moderate, and high. We have a different response, number of engines and aircraft that we send. And we talked today with CAL FIRE. You know, maybe we're just going to have a low and a high. We're not going to do a moderate response. We'll just send everything we normally send on a moderate that we do on a high, so we get more resources there. Because really, the best thing I can tell you is a quick suppression response is going to save us in the long run. Hit it hard when it's small. Because once these things get going, you can imagine that sea of dead trees that's on the landscape out there. CAL FIRE, Forest Service, other partners, we can bring a lot of folks, but really, are they going to do a whole lot when the whole hillside gets on fire? So, we need to be thinking strategically. Where can we get firefighters to start firefighting aggressively, but also safely? Because we're not going to get anybody killed fighting fires, okay? Because there's a lot of potential out there. One thing I worked on today was South Ops, and I'll be working with CAL FIRE as well, is doing an alert, an advisory for this area that might extend from the Stanislaus down to the pass of Sequoia as far as the number of dead trees and how that's going to affect fire behavior, as well as safety of our firefighters and the public. Because those things are weakened. They've been dead for a couple years. It won't take long for them to fall down. And so that's something I want you to be thinking about when you walk on your land and you've got 40 ponderosa pines that's been dead for a while. The wind's blowing. I'm worried about you. Okay, I'm worried about the loggers getting out there trying to deal with this mess. You know, we're going to need your help. And we're going to need your patience, too, because when we get our crews out there working these roads and brushing them, as well as when the loggers are working, it's going to be noisy for quite a while. And so, you know, having folks calling in saying, you know, I really wish you would stop the chippers, stop the chainsaws. Well, the bugs aren't going to stop, and I can't stop the fires. They're going to happen. All I can do is respond to them and hope for the best. So I'm trying to stack the cards in our favor best I can, and I'm going to need your help.
Oh, well, we do have a question. Can we get a microphone back here?
You hit a point that's real touchy to me. Last year, last fire season, I called in 3 different lightning strikes. One of them was responded to. It was over in the park on the south side. The other 2, one of them I called into CAL FIRE, and CAL FIRE, I told them, come up to my place. I told them where I was at because they could see it. But no, they didn't come up to my place. They went all up the Isham Valley, couldn't find it, went back. But this shows me there's no cooperation with the forestry and CAL FIRE because it wasn't until the next afternoon that CAL FIRE found out that it was on the forestry property over in Red Canyon, or Redwood Canyon. So, I mean, this concerns me. I live up here, and I see fires. They may be a mile, 5 miles, 10 miles away, but it still concerns me because it can go fast. That there should be better cooperation. CAL FIRE didn't know anything about those. So you hit a real sore subject. You're working with CAL FIRE, but yet CAL FIRE didn't know anything about the fire that you guys had up there. You know, that concerns me.
I appreciate your due diligence in making sure that we're seeing the fires on the landscape because it is a big landscape. You know, and we do work with CAL FIRE, and they work with us, and sometimes we're not seeing what you're seeing. So be patient and keep reporting in that case.
There's phones that you can call CAL FIRE and tell you, I've got something in that area.
Yeah.
We used to do it with the forestry when I worked for Kern County Fire Department. We kept in control of that whole area. But we worked together.
Now, all I can say is thank you. We're doing our best. You know, it's not a perfect situation. I mean, luckily, that fire didn't get very big, did it?
No, it didn't get very
Okay.
luckily.
Yeah. This year, I'm really worried about that little fire. And so I'm going to need your help. And if we're not doing the job that we're supposed to be doing, I need you to say, hey, wake up. There's a fire on the hill. Okay.
Any other questions for Chief Skaggs? One over here.
I'd kind of like like to get a handle on just how big this problem is. How far north, how far south, and how far east does this extend? This die-off, we see it here locally in our communities and on your map, but literally how far? And is that going to pull some of our resources from this area to help them up north and down south? Or are you guys going to help and stay and communicate with us?
Well, in terms of just the bark beetle activity, I'll let them speak on the Forest Service response. Our aerial surveys have pretty much found, if you look on the U.S. Drought Monitor for California, it's an easy website to get to. Pretty much, we are in the exceptional drought range. I mean, it's not just extreme, it's not just severe, we are exceptional. And everywhere it is, you know, like an incredibly dark brown, because that's what it looks like nowadays. On the U.S. Drought Monitor, that's where we're having our bark beetle activity. It really is all the way up to the Modoc, down the whole south, the South Sierras, and even into Southern California.
And I'm not sure it stopped at the Oregon-California border. I think if you cross the border, you'd find them in Oregon too.
We have one more.
That, I would totally agree with that.
Quick question, when all is said and done, and the trees are gone, and many of us may want to replant, is there going to be a program for us to get trees free, cheap, to replant?
Anybody want to talk about available pines?
There are a bunch of different programs to help with reforesting. There are some things with urban forestry for areas within communities themselves. There's something called the CFIP program, the California Forest Improvement Program, that will help with reforestation. It is a cost share, so things aren't free, but it will pay a big chunk of things.
Okay, let's go ahead and move on to our other federal partner. That would be the National Park Service. And so I'll ask the Park Service to address both angles of this. And first is, what is the Park Service doing to address the growing mortality problem in terms of fire hazard, as well as what are they doing to address the problem in terms of forest health?
Okay. So what we're looking at here is actually outside the park. Is that correct? Okay, yeah. So that's not Park Ridge. My name is John Ziegler, longtime resident. I roamed these hills as a child, and I just want you to know it's as heartbreaking to me as it is to you folks to see this stuff going on. And we don't like to see it, definitely as a Park Service, and the rest of the panel here does not like to see it. The Park Service has, as you probably all know, a long-standing history with fuels treatment. Either mechanical or fire. Fire not always being the most popular, but it's our most effective means for treating the forest. And we have concentrated most of our efforts in what we call the WUI, which is the Wild and Urban Interface area. In the park, we have 4 WUI areas: Cedar Grove, Grant Grove, Lodgepole, Ash, and Mineral King. So that's 5. And in the last 30 years, we spent a lot of effort, money, treating those areas. Mineral King was a monumental feat. Got complete fuel treatment below the whole Mineral King area. We don't do much in ash. We do a lot in giant forests and have treated most of these Sequoia groves and all the urban interface. And Grant Grove, this last year, we completed one little chunk of the puzzle, which was the north boundary burn, which actually gave a complete treatment around the whole Wilsonia and the whole Grant Grove area, which is about a mile wide of treated area. So we've done a lot, but it's been a long, long process getting there. Because a lot of the areas we had to mechanically treat first before it was even safe to treat with fire. And so a lot of the areas that we've treated, I'm not seeing a lot of mortality, and Tom could speak on this behalf as a forester. But I don't think the science is in yet on whether or not it's because it's a higher altitude, whether our fuels treatments have been successful in creating a healthier forest, or a combination of all that. What I have noticed is on the south end of the park, about 5,500 feet, we're seeing cedar and ponderosa pine kill. And we're also seeing a huge ponderosa kill in Cedar Grove. And that specific spot right there is probably the worst in the park. And right now, Tom's been heading up, or been on the team, discussing what we're going to do. So maybe you could speak more on what we're going to do with the Cedar Grove after I'm done here. But the thing is, I think we really need to work together as a community. Are there any Wilsonia folks here? No Wilsonia? So one Wilsonia. So we got the whole area treated around Wilsonia, but the one thing we don't really have treated well is the interior. So if we were to get something that starts down here, or in the Pinehurst area, and say we got a large column of fire coming up with huge firebrands, we could still potentially have issues in Wilsonia. So what we really need to do as a community is really, really work on that defensible space. Anything that can catch probably will catch, especially with the long needle pine that really is receptive to firebrands. Tom, can you speak about what we're doing in Mineral King, or actually down Cedar Grove?
You know, my name is Tom Warner. I'm the park forester in the park, and I arrived in the park in 1975, and those of you that have been here around here a while remember the 75, 76, 76, 77 drought. That was a drop in the bucket compared to this. The precipitation for the 2-year drought in the 70s was right around 50%, but it was ended by 150% of normal in 1977, 78. The mortality back then didn't peak until, this was a question earlier, didn't peak until the fall of 1978, about 6 months after the drought ended. 150% of normal didn't end it, and then the following year, I think it did drop down again, but it peaked in the fall of 78. There were 260 some trees in the 120 acres of campgrounds in Cedar Grove in the last 2 years, and I think it's still rising, like Beverly said. In the last 2 years, we've marked over 1,700 trees in Cedar Grove, and almost 1,200 trees just in the 4 campgrounds. So 1,700 trees and 170 acres, that's 10 trees per acre. So you divide that by 2, that's 5 trees per acre. The background level in the park is probably about less than half a tree per acre per year. So this is a 10-fold increase. The precipitation this year is less than 50% at Grant Grove and Ash Mountain for this time of year. And it's not going to get any better. So we've had 1,700 trees in Cedar Grove, and we've taken out about half of those in the last 2 years with our crew, trying to do it in-house. So far, the park has decided not to pursue a timber sale down there. That might change, I don't know. But we have talked about that, we've discussed it. So we're similar to the Forest Service in terms of dealing with the tree hazards. We try not to let them become imminent. We'd like to deal with them before they become imminent hazards, potential high priority hazards. We only deal with about 1,000 acres of developed site. Out of the almost 1 million acres we have in the park, there's about 1,000 acres that we deal with, and about 75 miles of roads. And we try to survey those a minimum of once every 3 years for hazards in the developed sites and once every 5 years on the roads. Like John said, we rely outside the developed areas mostly with prescribed burning, some mechanical treatment in high priority areas. We are working with the Forest Service, and we're not going to pursue it till the drought ends, whenever that may be, but we're also looking at possibly trying to get some Forest Service forest health funding to do some thinning in Cedar Grove. Years ago in the 80s, we had a pretty intensive dwarf mistletoe control program down there to removed, I think it was something like 2,600 trees and pruned about 1,700 trees to reduce the incidence of dwarf mistletoe to one of the pathogens or diseases that predisposes trees to mortality. I probably carried on enough here, but did I answer your question, John?
Can we get a microphone? Deb,
Go ahead, Mr. Alonzo. Okay. Is that better?
Okay. I had the pleasure of working under Mr. Warner, and I was a high climber, so I understand about PG&E because I was also a line clearer. The question I had, and it doesn't matter which way the wind blows, what matters is how the tree falls. One thing that I wanted to point out, Warner, what advice could you give these homeowners? Because I know that we're limited to what we're saying when we're working for government, but what good advice could you give these homeowners to help them out with their trees? And with Kuiper and with John, because working underneath you guys, I've seen a lot accomplished with the minimum of work staff and following. And it's a shame that the Forest Service can't hire year-round programs to have A, B, and C fallers. Because if I asked you right now how many C fallers you have, you would tell me the lowest number. And, you know, C fallers means that there's a limited classification that you can fall a tree according to the diameter size. So when they say they're gonna fall some trees, it's gonna be between 36 to 24 inches on DVH. Any more, they have to have a classification higher than that. So not only are their hands strapped and tied down because they can't hire full-time employees, but also they're fallers. As far as I'm concerned with PG&E, they need to, these people are paying, we all pay taxes. We also all pay utility bills. There's a budget on that utility bills for things like this that come around. They just don't want to let you guys know about it. But we know as line clearers, we have to get so many trees to make you guys profits. And that means if we have to skip rope, jump rope, we're gonna do it in order to get that tree count. So what you need to do as inspectors is push it and say, hey, these people up here are in really big trouble. And yes, when it's easy accessible, they can do that. But when it's back in the back area where they can't get heavy equipment or do something about that, then it becomes a budget issue. So everybody needs to work together here. We need to pull the Park Service. We need to get CAL FIRE. And since I work with CAL FIRE, I understand that too with fires. You know, your budget is limited too and your help. And the same thing about classifying sea fallers too. That's limited. So I feel if we all join together, we can do something, because every agency always tries to outdo the other, but now I think it's time that we all work together.
Thanks. That's a good comments. Back to the question to both the Park Service and the Forest Service. It's a question that has kind of been walked around here, but nobody's really ever addressed it, I don't think, directly. And that is, what can be done to remove the dead trees along public roads, specifically Highway 180 and 245? And are the federal agencies working with Caltrans to actually make that happen? And is anybody aware of the process of how to go about that?
Well, from the Park Service perspective, I don't know if you folks have noticed when you went up to Grant Grove, But the maintenance crew has actually done a mechanical swath about 20 feet off both sides of the road. And that also continues all the way down to Ash Mountain from the Giant Force side. So they've done that.
Okay, for 180, Caltrans has a right-of-way easement, and also for 245, they're both state highways. So the process is that if 245 goes through private property and you have a tree that you know could fall into the road, what you would do is you would directly call Caltrans, but you would need to tell them specifically where that tree is. Then they're going to determine if that tree's within the right-of-way. And the right-of-way varies depending upon where you are along 245 and 180. It varies based upon if there's turnouts, if there's parking areas. It could be anywhere from 65 feet from the center line to 100 feet from the center line. So the basic deal with Caltrans is that they will send their tree crew out to fall that tree if they determine it's in the right-of-way. They'll work with the Forest Service on Highway 180 and on 245 if they find it's within Forest Service land, but they will just fall the tree and leave it on the ground. And there is a District 6, which is the Caltrans district here. There's a phone number that you would call directly. I have that phone number. I can leave it here. But I don't know if anyone's ever done that before, but that's what you would do.
Okay, thank you, Teresa. In the interest of time, I lost myself here. There we go. In the interest of time, we're going to start trying to wind some things down here. Hopefully, a number of our panelists will stick around. If you have questions, buttonhole them after the meeting, get a hold of them, and see if they can answer your question specifically, because that might be the best way to get that little last piece of information that you have. But let's go ahead and talk a little bit now. As a wrap-up, where do we go from here? We've kind of got some idea of this big problem that we have. Rather than questions now, are there comments from the audience in terms of how can we make this situation better?
I have a question, which is actually directed to Kathy, because this is what you were talking to me the other day about. So I understand the Fire Safe Council, the Oak to Timberline Council, is sort of, it's not really dead. It actually still has its nonprofit status. Is it possible to revive the Fire Safe Council and perhaps work towards some of these grants that CAL FIRE was speaking of?
Is anybody here a member of the Fire Safe Council or was on the board? Would you like to speak to that? Alan, I didn't realize you were here. Actually, he's on
Yeah, for the last year, there's been very little interest, and we've had a series of meetings, and nobody shows up. And we even had a meeting with CAL FIRE about a year ago to see what could be done to revive it. And we've been kind of at a loss and thinking that maybe we ought to shut it down. But reluctant to do that, and as I see this problem that we're having with the dead trees and so on, there may be more interest generated in trying to keep this thing going. But it is a nonprofit organization, and would like to see it going. Some of us that are on the board are from the valley, but the reason we're on it is because we have some property here close to Pinehurst, and so we're ready for help.
Yeah, the Fire Safe Councils are viable means, and they still do have support, although some of that support has dwindled. There's not as much money out there as it used to. I can put kind of on my old hat and talk a little bit about that. Is that there's still Fire Safe Councils are probably the best avenue that you've got in terms of moving forward. John, do you have any? I know Wilsonia has a Fire Safe Council, and they've done pretty well.
Yeah, Wilsonia has we call it the Wilsonia Fire Safe Committee. essentially the same thing. And it's been an advocate group comprised of myself plus the Wilsonia community members, trying to get the Wilsonia community to do defensible space more than anything else, but also look at longer range goals. But yeah, the Oakland to timber, I was curious about that too. I inquired about it. It just seemed like it kind of fell by the wayside. I would, by all means, rejoin a group if it were to reestablish itself, and I'm sure the rest of the members here would too.
Yeah, just real quick, speaking of that, if there is anybody interested and people want to get involved, Chief Hogan over here has we'll start signing people up and get names and phone numbers that we can work with the existing board members and try to get this thing back off the ground. So that, I mentioned it earlier, we're very sincere about that, and Chief Hogan would love to take your names this evening. Thank you.
And just a very brief conversation that I had with Mahalia, where's Mahalia? Beforehand, one of the things that just kind of popped into mind was, as a community, are we willing to form a working group, for want of a better term to call it, a group of people who are interested in saying, yeah, I'm willing to put some time and effort, and a Fire Safe Council is certainly a good working group to do that, into actually making a difference, finding the grants, finding the money, seeking the opportunities, finding your county commissioners, doing whatever the job is that needs to be done. And so with that, hopefully there's going to be a sign-up sheet in the back of the room that you can put your name and your contact information down, and we can work further on that.
I have a question.
Okay.
This is a more kind of specific question, but I think a lot of us are homeowners that are starting to remove trees that look dead. And I didn't get a very clear answer to this, but you know, I have both cedar and pine. Some of them are you know, half dead, half brown, half green. Some of them are 3/4 brown and 1/4 green. And my question is, I mean, when should I chop them down? I mean, when are they just totally lost? And there's two possibilities. I can water some of them. There are a few of them that are really key. So if there's like 1/4 green, should I still chop it down because it's just hopeless? So how do we make a decision on when to take the trees down is basically the question.
Is this thing still on? You got one of these things? Dig into the bark. If the bark's not pink or cream colored, I mean the inner bark, the phloem, the cambium layer, if it's brown, the tree's dead, regardless of what the crown looks like.
And that's true for cedar?
Yeah.
So with that, I would like to go ahead and open it up to the panelists. If any of the panelists have any additional comments that they would like to make?
Right up above us here, we have a really good resource, and that's Park Ridge. And Kathy and Wendy head that up. So I think one of the key defenses that we have is early detection. And I know that there's a lot of the volunteer lookouts that are here. I just want to say thanks again for all the volunteer work you can do. If there's any year that's going to be really handy and helpful, it's this year. I want to thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions that seem pretty excellent to the conversation here, kind of last minute questions that just pop into somebody's mind? Question right back here.
I have a cabin at Cedar Brook, and I don't know, there's about 30 cabins that are all along the creek. And we feel kind of trapped because there's dead trees all around Cedar Brook. And I don't know, some of the trees along our creek are starting to die as well. Is there any organization that can help us with this problem? It's private land.
Okay, do we have anybody on the panel that could?
Is it on? I'm in the process of writing a timber harvest plan for your neighbors at the Cedars just beyond you, to do what Thurley and Susan Hines did to their property 3 years ago. They thinned out their trees. Then they got some CFIP grant, cost share money from the state, went in, masticated a lot of the brushes left over. It looks real nice, looks like a park. It's much more fire resistant. I went up there today, and there are very few dead trees on their property. It goes from the Cedars all the way up to the top of Loggers Point, pretty much around Neff's camp. And it looks real nice. So I'm doing that for your neighbors, and get a hold of me, and I can see about including yours into that plan too.
Well,
if
I'm
you'd
in
like.
the Cedars. I didn't know that you were working on that.
Yes.
How about Cedar Brook?
I have not talked to Cedar Brook, just the Cedars.
Okay, well, one of the dangerous things is there's only one way in and out of that.
I just so happened I wrote a forest management plan for the Cedars, and my number one recommendation was to open up the road from the Cedars up through Neff's camp. But it would take very little work to do it, and it's crazy not to do that. The road's already there; it just needs to be opened up.
Sounds good.
And Thurley and Susan have given their permission to go through their property if that road were opened up.
Okay.
Great.
The folks outside can't hear you. Totally agreed. Well, we got our work cut out for us. Thanks to everybody for coming this evening. Hopefully you got something out of this that you can take home with you. And again, thanks to everybody. Have a nice evening. Have a safe drive home.